Imagine three different people. Let's call them Denise, Omar, and Wes. Last year, in the exact same month, all three of them crossed a massive financial milestone, $100,000 in net worth. They all took a mental screenshot of that same little green line going up on their banking apps. You've probably had a version of that screenshot yourself, or maybe you're grinding right now to put your number next to theirs. But here's the unsettling truth. What happens next to Denise, Omar, and Wes has almost nothing to do with how smart they are. Denise, 78% trapped inside the walls of a house. Omar, sitting in three index funds so boring they could legally be used as anesthesia. Wes, sitting in a brokerage account in cash, waiting for a plan. Fast forward 30 years, one of these three people is $986,000 behind the one who did the absolute least. And the reason for this massive gap isn't even a decision they actively sought out. It's a decision that was simply presented to them in week 6, with unrequested terms already filled in. A decision that never even showed up for the other two. If you've ever hit a savings milestone and felt, for about 4 days, like you finally figured money out, sit tight. Because today, we're walking through exactly what happens after you hit $100,000. And more importantly, the invisible traps designed to take it right back. Bursting the bubble. Let's start with an uncomfortable reality. Your $100,000 is not what your brain thinks it is. According to the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances, having a $100,000 net worth puts you at roughly the 38th percentile in America. Read that again, the 38th percentile. You're not in the millionaires club. You're not even in the parking lot of the club. Statistically, you are slightly below average, holding a number that feels enormous. And be very careful here, because this is where a lot of financial gurus lie to you using averages. You'll constantly hear that the average American household net worth is around $1.06 million. But the median, the actual middle point, is $192,900. Same country, both numbers. The average is just 5 times higher because a handful of billionaires who own hospitals drag the math into orbit. When someone quotes you an average net worth, they aren't informing you, they're doing a magic trick. But your 100K milestone is real in one very specific way. When you have $100,000 invested at a 7% real return, your portfolio throws off about $7,000 a year without you lifting a finger. It is the very first moment in your life where your portfolio contributes something comparable to your own physical labor. Your snowball is finally rolling, which is exactly why this is the worst possible moment to take your hands off the wheel. Where your money sits right now decides who can see it, who can sell to you, and whether you can actually reach it when your car dies. Denise and the drywall trap. Let's look at Denise. In week 1 of hitting her milestone, Denise did the single most respectable thing an American can do. She bought a house. Her net worth tracker says $104,000. It feels incredible, but in the most literal sense, her wealth is now a wall. Federal data shows the median household holds around 68% of its wealth in its primary residence. So if your $100,000 looks like the typical Americans, you don't actually own a portfolio. You own drywall. And drywall is a fascinating asset. You can't sell it in pieces. You aren't diversified. You're tied to one asset, one city, and one job market, which is probably tied to the exact same employer that signs your paychecks. You pay about 1% to 2% of its value every single year just to keep the roof from caving in and the pipes from leaking. And if you ever want your money back out, it's going to cost you 8 to 10% in closing costs and realtor fees.
Your house is essentially the world's most expensive ATM. Now let's look at week 3 for Denise. It's a Tuesday. The transmission goes out on the interstate. She's on the shoulder with her hazards on hold with the tow company. While the hold music plays, she opens her banking app. Checking account, $40. She opens her other app, the net worth tracker, $104,000. She stares at both numbers. Then she puts the $2,200 repair bill on a credit card charging 19% interest and drives home in a loaner car, technically wealthier than 60% of the country. This isn't just a Denise problem. A recent Bankrate survey found that nearly 60% of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. Here's what nobody tells you about crossing $100,000. Net worth is a scoreboard. It is not a bank account. You cannot pay a mechanic in home equity, and I promise you the tow truck driver does not care about your zestimate. Denise spends the next 8 years of her life with her wealth completely real, but permanently out of reach. Wes and the target on his back. Now let's move to week 6 for Wes. His brokerage balance ticks past 6 figures on a Tuesday afternoon. Thursday morning, his phone rings. It's a local number. The man on the other end is warm, unhurried, genuinely likable. He mentions he works with a lot of people at Wes's company. He doesn't pitch anything. He just asks if anyone's ever built Wes an actual plan, in a tone that makes it clear that of course nobody has. He offers to buy Wes a coffee. There's a small conference room, a whiteboard, a pristine folder with Wes's name spelled correctly on the front. But it wasn't just the phone ringing. That same week, Wes got 2 envelopes in the mail. A pre-approved auto financing offer with the interest rate already quoted, and a cash-out refinance mailer telling him how much untapped equity he was sitting on. Nobody sent Wes any of that when he had $4,000. All of this arrived within 6 weeks of one number crossing one invisible line. Why? Because $100,000 to $250,000 in assets is where you clear most financial advisors' minimums. It's where your credit profile tips into a tier that generates automated offers. You didn't apply for anything, you just became eligible, and eligibility gets sold to the highest bidder.
Hold on to that week, because everything Wes loses over the next 30 years traces back to it. And the biggest loss doesn't even come from the advisor, it comes from the envelope. The I made it reflex and the truck. Something psychological happens to you when you cross $100,000, and it's not a character flaw, it's a reflex. Some part of your brain files this moment as graduation. You drove the beat-up Corolla, you said no to the expensive vacations, and now the number says you made it. Your brain whispers, we can stop being weird about money now. But that reflex doesn't fire on its own. It fires when something gives it permission, and for Wes, permission arrived in the mail. The rate was already filled in. He didn't wake up wanting to buy a $50,000 truck, but he'd been carrying a piece of paper in his kitchen drawer for 7 weeks that said yes before he'd even asked. The average new car today costs nearly $50,000. The average finance payment is $772 a month. And here's the terrifying part. Nearly 30% of trade-ins last quarter were underwater. People owed $7,200 more than the car was worth. So what did they do? They rolled that negative equity into an 84-month loan. That's 7 years, long enough to finance a car, have a child, and have that child develop verbal opinions about the car. But to afford that $772 truck payment, the money had to come from somewhere. So Wes stopped contributing to his investments. Not permanently, just for a while. The $100K looked healthy anyway, right? Let's price out Wes's 5-year pause. If you have $100,000 invested at age 32 and you were putting in $1,000 a month, but you stopped for 5 years to pay for a truck, you saved $60,000 in cash flow during that pause. But at a 7% real return, That pause just cost you roughly $476,000 by retirement. A 7-to-1 exchange rate on your own money. The dollars you skip in your 30s have the longest runway to grow. When you pause saving at 32, you aren't deciding to save $60,000 less. You are deciding to work extra years at the very end of your life. The 1% fee illusion. Now let's talk about that friendly advisor. Year 3. Wes signs on with him at a 1% assets under management AUM fee. It's not a scam, it's just the industry standard. But let's do the math. Take your $100,000, add $1,000 a month for 30 years at 7% growth. You'd end up with about $2,032,000. But at 6% growth, after giving up that 1% fee, you end up with $1,607,000. The friendly 1% fee cost you roughly $425,000. It is taken one invisible slice at a time, and the fee grows every time your portfolio succeeds. You might say, but a good advisor stops you from panic selling during a market crash. And yes, that's real. But are you really willing to pay $425,000 for 4 hours of coaching a year? A fee-only financial planner, charging by the hour, gives you the exact same conversation, the same whiteboard, and the same coffee for a flat $2,000.
The problem was never the advice. It's the pricing structure that casually devours a fifth of your life savings. And because the fee comes out before the balance is shown to Wes, he never even sees the bill. Omar, the lazy millionaire. So what happened to Omar? Omar crossed the same 100K threshold that same week. His phone never rang. Not once. Not that month, not that year. Why? Because Omar's money was in boring, unsexy, low-cost index funds. There was no commission to be made. No one in the financial services industry had a reason to buy him coffee because there was no margin in printing a folder with his name on it. Wes even offered to introduce Omar to his advisor. Omar said he'd think about it, but the paperwork looked annoying, and he'd lost his login password twice already. That was the entire decision. No grand investing principle. Omar was just mildly lazy on a Tuesday, and it made him a millionaire. Later, during a boring meeting at work, Omar accidentally clicked a submenu in his 401k portal that allowed after-tax contributions, the mega backdoor Roth. That single distracted click routed his money into a triple tax-advantaged account. Over 25 years, that one lazy click was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax savings. The 30-year reveal and the 72-hour test. Let's look at the final scoreboard 30 years later. Person, strategy, final net worth. Omar kept it automatically investing in boring index funds, $2,032,000. Denise trapped wealth in drywall, house rich, cash poor, $1,226,000, 55% stuck in the house. Wes bought the truck, paused investments, paid 1% fee, $1,046,000. Wes is $986,000 behind Omar. The advisor accounted for about $280,000 of that loss, but the remaining $705,000, that came entirely from the truck and the pause it forced. It came from a piece of paper that arrived unrequested in week 6 simply because his net worth had crossed a line that made him a target. Hitting 100K doesn't make you rich, it makes you findable. So here's the one thing I want you to do tonight. It'll take you 4 minutes. Work out what percentage of your net worth you could actually spend in the next 72 hours without selling property, borrowing against anything, or paying an early withdrawal penalty. Not what the net worth tracker says, what you can actually reach. For a lot of people, that number comes back under 5%, and if that's you, you don't have $100,000. You have a scoreboard and you have a house. Your first 100K isn't a finish line, it isn't a graduation, and it is definitely not permission to stop paying attention. Keep doing the boring thing. It was working. That's exactly why they called. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below with where you are on your milestone journey. And as always, stay boring with your investments. I'll see you in the next one.